you?
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Hey, good to see you after we met briefly at the event in 2008 in Minneapolis for Ron Paul.
Oh, that was fun. I remember that.
But you had to leave early. What happened? Why did you bail on Ron Paul?
I'll tell you why. I didn't bail on Ron Paul. It's when Jesse Ventura got up and started saying 9/11 was an inside job.
He didn't say that.
Yeah, he did say that.
No, he said that it was curious why the FBI, had Bin Laden on.
Look, I got it. I was there, and but.
So you had to leave because that one controversial.
I was enraged by it. It wasn't controversial.
So you were personally enraged.
Let me answer your question.
Sure.
It wasn't controversial. It was stupid. And if there's any evidence that the government's behind 9/11, look, I believe anything if there's evidence, but there isn't any. So knock it off. That's my view.
Okay, but
I said that to him.
Sure. But one stupid person says something stupid at a Ron Paul event.
I hate that. And by the way, I am open to almost any crackpot theory about anything. It's just on that subject. Come on, you know what I mean? That's too much. That even for me.
So, just out of curiosity, then, what's your take on Building 7? Which explanation do you believe?
Come on. This is like...
No, that's a serious question. Which explanation did it?
Which explanation?
There's two explanations. It was either it was pulled, or it was isolated pockets of fire in the building that were sort of side effects from the two towers coming down that brought it down.
This is a no-win conversation, so I'm not going to continue it. But let me just say one thing: my macro view is the obvious one, which is the buildings came down because a bunch of nutcases flew a plane into them.
Okay, so are you still supporting Ron Paul?
I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm supporting Ron Paul. I like Ron Paul. I've always liked Ron Paul.
So, are you supporting anybody in the race this year?
No, I don't support. I don't even.
You're
vote
an objective journalist.
I don't even vote. I'm hardly objective. I'm honest. I'm not objective.
There you go.
Certainly not afraid to speak your mind.
No, I'm not. No, you can assess my views. They're very clear.
You have any
But
message?
I hate that 9/11 crap. Wish they just kicked those people out. I mean,
aunt was supposed to be on the 93rd floor.
Really?
It's important for people whose families were involved to know the truth, whether or not the government was involved or whether it was terrorists. But there's a history of government-sponsored terror throughout the past century.
Exactly.
So what do you mean kick them out?
I don't know. Whatever.
Anybody who's a 9/11 truther should be kicked out of the country?
Of course not. I don't even believe in parking tickets. I mean, please. I just don't. I think that people, before saying something that heavy, ought to present real evidence and not just it's a coincidence or questions remain and dumb.
I think the fact that steel doesn't weaken until 2,400 degrees is evidence that jet fuel couldn't cause a collapse of the tower from being hit near the top.
Except the thing is, it did. So that's the problem.
Steel doesn't melt until 2,400 degrees, and it didn't.
Now, I go back to our interventionist Carl, way back when we first funded Al Qaeda. Back when they were fighting the Soviets. We gave them a lot of money. CIA pretty much trained them. I mean that's pretty much enough evidence for me.
That the government brought down the Twin Towers?
No, the government was involved in bringing down the Twin Towers because they would not be trained. Because who trained them? The government trained them. The CIA trained them. Special ops trained them.
All right, I've had this debate so many times. It's not, I don't know. It seems to me that it's kind of beneath like adult discourse, even really, I guess, and it definitely discredits otherwise good ideas.
I just think that the implications, if the government was involved, the implications are so vast that it should be looked into whether or not it seems ridiculous.
So for family members of the victims that are asking questions and want the evidence that's been withheld by the government released, you would say that they're less than adults somehow for wanting that information?
I would say that parasites like you make it much worse for them. That's what I would say.
I'm a parasite now?
Yeah, it's filthy to say things like that with no evidence, and you have none, so you should stop. That's my view.
Welcome back. Millions of people watched the horror of 9/11 right before their very eyes, live on television. Two planes crashing into the World Trade Center, and less than a couple of hours later, both towers, of course, collapsing. My next guest says that hijackers may not have brought down the towers by themselves. Here to explain his controversial theory, Stephen Jones. He's a professor of physics at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. Professor Jones, thanks for coming on.
Sure, thanks, Tucker.
Well, just sum up this, obviously, your theory, just the one sentence. that I just explained in the intro contradicts what we all think we know about how these towers collapsed. Quickly sum up your explanation for what happened.
Well, I'd like to start with this paper that you referred to. It's available online. What I'm doing, Tucker, is presenting evidence but it's a hypothesis to be tested. That's a big difference from a conclusion. And so I just wanted to clarify that. But to sum up, I've looked at the official reports by FEMA and so on regarding the collapse of these buildings.
Right.
I'd like to look at the collapse of Building 7 in just a minute. It was not even hit by a jet, so we should look at that one.
The two towers, the explanation has been that the fire inside was so intense that it weakened the structural steel and that each floor collapsed down upon the next in a pancake fashion and they imploded in on themselves. Is that essentially, I think, what people think?
Yeah, that's basically it, yeah. And so what I've done is to analyze these reports. But I would like to do a little experiment with you, Tucker, if I could. I sent out a video clip of the collapse of Building 7, because most people haven't actually seen that one, and that's the crux of the argument that I'm presenting.
Okay, sum up very quickly the argument for us. You believe there were explosives in the buildings planted by someone, detonated.
Well, yeah.
Is that correct?
In other words, the hypothesis to be tested is there's two hypotheses here. One is fire and damage caused all three buildings to collapse.
Okay.
The other is that explosives in the buildings may have caused the collapse. And so then we analyze and see which fits the data better. And I've done that in my 25-page paper.
I want to read you a quote from the Deseret Morning News, a paper in Utah from you. I'm quoting now. "It is quite plausible that explosives were pre-planted in all three buildings and set off after the two plane crashes, which were actually a diversion tactic. Muslims are probably not to blame for bringing down the World Trade Center buildings after all." That's, I would think, pretty offensive to a lot of people listening. Do you have any evidence for that? I mean,
well, not to the Muslims, I might say.
Well, that's a good.
I've had a lot of emails.
I'm sure your writings have been greeted with glee in Islamabad and Peshawar and places like that. But for Americans,
well, I haven't received any notes from there, but just good people. I have Muslim friends. Let me read, for example, but I'm not going to let you off the hook. I really want to do this experiment with you.
We don't have a lot of time for experiments, Professor, but if you could just give us one thing to hold on to. How you make these claims or appear to make these claims. Do you have any evidence that there were bombs in the building?
Sure. Let's start with the collapse of Building 7. Can you roll the video clip that I sent to you?
Okay, I'm not sure if we can, but to specify, that is World Trade Center building number 7,
try it.
Smaller than the other two, was not hit by a plane, of course, yet it collapsed.
Right, it's 47 stories.
That's right.
24 steel columns in the center.
Right.
Trusses asymmetrically supported. Now, I can't see what you're seeing, so
we just
are you rolling that?
No, we just see the building. And just so our viewers know, the explanation that I think is conventional is that there was a large tank of diesel fuel stored in the lower level of that, which caught fire, and the resulting fire collapsed the building.
Well, that's basically it, yeah. But as we read in the FEMA report, it says here, and I put this in my paper, of course, the best hypothesis, which is the only one they looked at, fire, has only a low probability of occurrence. Further investigation, analyses are needed to resolve this issue, and I agree with that.
Okay.
But they admit there's only a low probability. And if you look at the collapse, you see what I've studied is the fall time, the symmetry, the fact that it first dips in the middle, that's called the kink, which is very characteristic, of course, of controlled demolition.
Professor, I am sorry that we are out of time, and I'm not sure that
one other thing I want to mention about...
Okay, if you can hit it, with it quickly.
All right. Okay, here we go. Molten metal in the basements of all three buildings.
Right.
And yet all scientists now reasonably agree that the fires were not sufficiently hot to melt the steel. So what is this molten metal? It's a direct evidence for the use of high temperature explosives such as thermite. Thermite produces molten iron as a as an end product.
Okay.
So
Well,
we do have, yeah, it's a very short time, but people will read the paper, then I talk about the molten metal, the symmetry of the collapse, and the weaknesses and inadequacies of the fire hypothesis.
Professor, we're going to have to leave it to our viewers who are interested enough to follow up to do just that. We appreciate your coming on, even if I don't understand your theories. We appreciate you trying to explain them. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Tucker.
Thanks. David Ray Griffin is a theology professor and a member of the group Scholars for 9/11 Truth. He's also the author of the book Christian Faith and the Truth Behind 9/11, A Call to Reflection and Action. That book is published by the Presbyterian Church's publishing arm. Mr. Griffin joins us from Santa Barbara, California. Mr. Griffin, thanks for coming on. You have no evidence that the government's behind 9/11, and I frankly think it's an awful thing to allege, considering it's not true and you haven't proved that it is.
Well, these things have to be determined in terms of evidence, and if you read this book and you read my two previous books, The New Pearl Harbor and then the 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions, you will see there are literally dozens of reasons to disbelieve the official theory about 9/11. I'm not proposing a new conspiracy theory. I'm rejecting the official conspiracy theory that we've been given by the government and the 9/11
But
Commission,
the implication,
and that has been used to justify all the activities that have been going on since 9/11.
Look, you don't like American foreign policy. That's fine. That's totally legitimate. I don't like American foreign policy most of the time. I get that, and I'm not in any way questioning your right to complain about the actions of our government. I'm merely saying it is wrong, blasphemous, and sinful for you to suggest, imply, or help other people come to the conclusion that the U.S. government killed 3,000 of its own citizens, because it didn't.
I thought the same thing for the first year and a half. You know, people will say, well, you're a conspiracy theorist, and so therefore you went looking for problems. The first year and a half, I accepted the official theory and assumed it was blowback for American foreign policy. And when somebody first suggested to me it was an inside job, I said, well, I didn't think the Bush administration, even the Bush administration, would do such a heinous thing. But then when I finally looked at the evidence, I saw that it was truly overwhelming.
Okay, well, let's get very specific, because I wish we had more time, but we don't. You say 6 of the hijackers may still be alive. What's the evidence for that? Please tell me specifically why you believe 6 of the hijackers could be alive.
Well, this is one of the examples of one of the dozens of things the 9/11 Commission simply refused to investigate, even though this was reported by mainline sources in England. You had both the BBC and the Telegraph putting out stories. Let's take the one about Walid al-Shira. The 9/11 Commission speculates that he was one on Flight 11 who stabbed one of the flight attendants.
Right, that's right.
And yet several days after 9/11, he came on and announced to the world that he's still alive in Morocco, where he's a pilot. We didn't get a word of that from the 9/11 Commission.
Yeah, well, you did not get a word of that from the 9/11 Commission, nor did you get a word of it from National Public Radio, the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC News, NBC News, MSNBC. You are suggesting...
But we did in papers in other
right, but I mean,
countries.
as someone who's been in journalism his whole adult life and grown up in a family of journalists, I can tell you, people who point to the journalism of Great Britain are almost always pointing to journalism with very low standards. Here's my obvious point. You're alleging not simply a cover-up by the U.S. government, but by the entire American media. It's totally implausible. Like, we would report that if that were true.
Tucker, not quite entire. But let me give another example of a failure to mention. You mentioned Oliver Stone's movie. Although he does not get into the question of who was responsible, when people see this movie, they will see that these towers came down in what is close to classic controlled demolition, the kind that's called implosion, that is produced by explosives. And first of all, steel-framed high-rise buildings have never before in history come down because of fire or fire plus externally produced damage, such as airplane damage.
What about being hit by jumbo jets? Have they ever come down? No, because they've never been hit by jumbo jets before.
And
I mean, so it's not like there's a precedent for this.
Tucker, the Empire State Building was hit by
during World War
airliner.
II by a prop plane traveling at 1/8 the speed of these planes. Look, I mean, facts matter.
But don't Tucker, the main point is that that buildings like this have never come down because of externally produced damage, and furthermore, Building 7 was not hit by an airplane.
No, I'm familiar
and so
with.
conveniently,
I know, and it came.
Yeah,
and
but
it came down.
then
But Mr. Griffin, I'm sorry.
you
we're
also know that Tucker, you know that the 9/11 Commission did not even mention in their 571-page report the fact that Building 7 collapsed.
I'm fully aware of that. I've actually read a lot that you've written, and here's my bottom line point. And I honestly wish, I'm not trying to cut you off, I wish we had more time. You haven't proved the government's behind it, and I hope that our viewers will read what you've written. Because I've read it. But unfortunately, we're out of time, and I appreciate your coming on.
Well, many people think otherwise, Tucker.
Apparently they do, and that's sad as far as I'm concerned. But thank you, Mr. Griffin, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.